Something very telling is happening around the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, and if you really pay attention to how these mock drafts are being put together, especially the one coming from ESPN's Matt Miller, you start to understand why there's a growing level of frustration among people who actually follow this team closely. Because, let's not sugarcoat this, the scenario being projected here doesn't just feel off. It feels completely disconnected from the reality of where this roster stands today. It all starts with the first round pick at number 21, where the Steelers are projected to take offensive tackle Caden Proctor. And look, on the surface, you can understand the reasoning. Proctor is a massive presence at 6'7", 352 pounds, a powerful mover with elite physical tools, long arms, and flashes of dominance. He allowed just 3 sacks and committed only 2 penalties last season, and he finished strong while impressing during pre-draft testing. But here's where things start to fall apart. This is a win-now team. That's the reality, and drafting a developmental offensive tackle in the first round and a player who is widely considered raw and still learning how to play the position at a high level simply doesn't align with that urgency, especially when you factor in the current situation at left tackle. There's a narrative out there that the Steelers are desperate at the position, but if you actually watched this team last season, you know that's not entirely true. Dylan Cook stepped in and was more than serviceable. In fact, he outperformed expectations and at times even outplayed Broderick Jones. He held his own throughout the year and gave this offense stability when it needed it. And yet this kind of projection ignores that completely, as if Cook is just another name on the roster sheet. That's the kind of disconnect that frustrates fans who actually follow every snap of this team. Now ask yourself this: does it really make sense to bring in a raw tackle like Proctor, either to sit in year one or to protect a 42-year-old quarterback like Aaron Rodgers while still learning on the job? Because that's the other layer here. The assumption that Rodgers is part of this equation moving forward. And if that's the case, the last thing you want is instability on the blind side. Then things take another turn in round 2, where the Steelers are projected to select LSU quarterback Garrett Nussmeier. And again, there's logic on paper. There's a connection to Mike McCarthy. There's arm talent, mobility, and he fits stylistically in a West Coast offense with his ability to throw accurately on the move. But when you dig deeper, the concerns become very clear. The Steelers have emphasized the idea of finding an AFC North quarterback, someone with size, physical presence, big hands, durability, and Nussmeier simply doesn't fit that mold. He's considered undersized, with physical limitations that raise real questions about how he would hold up in this division. And more importantly, you're talking about using a second-round pick on a quarterback who realistically isn't expected to play anytime soon. If Rodgers is indeed returning, Nussmeier is sitting. So now your first 2 picks, your most valuable assets in the draft, are likely not contributing in year 1. For a team that's trying to compete right now, that's a massive red flag. And this is where the bigger picture starts to come into focus, because it's not just about individual players. It's about resource allocation, urgency, and understanding what this roster actually needs to take the next step. There are clear gaps, especially at wide receiver, and yet this mock draft completely ignores that position early on. Not addressing that need until pick 99 puts immediate pressure on a rookie to step in as a reliable WR3, which is far from a guarantee, especially when that player is coming from a limited route tree system in college. So now you're looking at an offense that still lacks proven depth at receiver, while your top 2 draft picks are essentially long-term projects. That's not how you maximize a competitive window, and when you compare that to an alternative approach, one that prioritizes immediate impact players like a plug-and-play guard or an explosive receiver early, the difference becomes even more obvious. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about talent, it's about timing, fit, and understanding what this team actually is right now. So let me ask you this: if you're sitting in that draft room knowing this team is built to compete, would you really be comfortable walking away from the first 2 rounds with 2 players who might not even see the field in year 1? Because that's really what this all comes down to. The timeline. You can like a prospect, you can believe in their upside, you can even convince yourself that 2 or 3 years from now, they might turn into something valuable. But the Steelers are not operating on a 2 or 3 year timeline right now. Everything about the way this roster is being discussed, from the lack of urgency in free agency to the ongoing expectation that Aaron Rodgers could return, points to a team that believes it can compete immediately. And when that's your mindset, every premium pick has to reflect that urgency. That's why the rest of this mock draft only raises more concerns the deeper you go. There are a couple of selections that individually you can live with. For example, adding Jennings Dunker in round 3 to compete at at left guard makes sense. That's a physical player, a clear role, and legitimate competition on the interior offensive line. No issue there. But then you start looking at the defensive line addition, an undersized interior defender from Texas A&M who profiles as a run stopper without real pass rushing upside, and you begin to question the fit again. In today's NFL, especially in the AFC, you need disruption from your defensive front. You need players who can collapse the pocket, not just hold their ground, and drafting a player who doesn't clearly project into a defined role physically just adds more uncertainty. Then you finally address wide receiver at pick 99. And yes, there is value there. Chris Brazell brings size and speed, and there's some intrigue in what he could become, but the context matters. This is a player coming from an offense where the route tree was extremely limited. Slants, go routes, posts, comebacks. He hasn't consistently shown that full route running versatility that this offense needs, especially if you're expecting him to step in right away and contribute. So now you're putting pressure on a late third round rookie to solve a problem that should have been addressed much earlier, and it doesn't stop there. When you look at the rest of the draft, day 3 selections at safety, edge rusher, running back, multiple quarterbacks, and another offensive tackle, what you're really seeing is volume without clear direction. There are bodies being added, but how many of these players are realistically making an impact? How many are even making the roster? That's the difference between drafting with a plan and drafting just to fill out a board. And one of the most concerning parts of this entire scenario is the lack of investment at wide receiver. Only one receiver taken in a draft where the position is both a clear need and a known strength of the class. That's not just a miss, that's a major gamble, because if that one player doesn't hit immediately, you're left relying heavily on Roman Wilson to step into a bigger role, and that's a lot to ask without proper support around him. Now contrast all of that with the alternative approach presented in the other mock, going with a guard in round 1, a player who can step in immediately and stabilize the offensive line, followed by a dynamic, explosive receiver in round 2 who brings speed, separation, and playmaking ability. That's a completely different philosophy. That's a team saying, we're going to support our quarterback, we're going to fix the trenches, and we're going to add juice to this offense right now. And even that approach isn't perfect. There are still concerns, drops, value at certain spots, but at least the intention is clear. At least the picks align with the current needs and the competitive window of the team. That's really the biggest takeaway here. It's not about saying one player is good and another is bad. It's about understanding what this team needs today versus what it might need in the future, and making sure your most important draft capital reflects that reality. Because if you get that wrong, you don't just miss on players. You waste a season, and for a team that appears to be positioning itself for one more serious run, that's not something you can afford to do. So now it shifts back to you, looking at both approaches, looking at how this roster is built, looking at what this team is trying to accomplish right now. Which direction would you trust more if you were in charge of this draft? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video, and check out the next video on your screen, because we're gonna keep diving deeper into everything surrounding the Pittsburgh Steelers and the 2026 NFL Draft. And the truth is, this conversation isn't going away anytime soon, because as we get closer to the draft, you're going to keep seeing more projections like this. Some that align with what the Steelers actually need, and others that completely miss the mark in terms of timing, fit, and overall direction. And that's where the real separation happens between just evaluating talent and actually understanding team building. What makes this situation even more interesting is how quiet the Steelers have been in terms of forcing moves. There's a clear sense of patience, almost like they're deliberately keeping their options open, and when a team operates like that, it usually means one thing, and they don't want to be boxed into drafting for need. But there's a fine line, because while you don't want to reach, you also can't ignore reality. This offense needs more firepower. It needs reliability at key spots. And above all, it needs players who can contribute immediately if this team is serious about competing. That's why a draft approach that delays impact, especially in the first 2 rounds, feels so risky. You don't get many opportunities with premium picks. Those are the players who are supposed to shape your season right away. And if you walk out of day 2 still wondering how your offense is going to create separation, how your quarterback is going to be protected consistently, or where the explosiveness is coming from, then you've probably misread the moment. And that's the the biggest concern with everything we just broke down. It's not just about missing on a player. It's about missing on the identity of your own team. Because right now, the Steelers are not rebuilding. They're not resetting. They're not in a position where they can afford to wait on development across multiple premium picks. They're trying to win, and if that's truly the case, then every decision, especially in the early rounds, has to reflect that urgency, that clarity, and that understanding of what's at stake. So as all these mock drafts continue to come out, keep asking yourself one simple question: does this actually help the Steelers win right now? Because if the answer to that question starts leaning toward not really, then everything else becomes noise. And that's why this specific mock draft sparked such a strong reaction. It's not just disagreement. It's the feeling that the plan itself doesn't match the moment the Steelers are in. You can live with a missed pick. Every team has them. But what's much harder to accept is a draft strategy that doesn't reflect urgency when urgency is exactly what the situation demands. Think about the message it sends inside the locker room. You've got veterans on this roster who are preparing to compete right now. You potentially have a 42-year-old quarterback in Aaron Rodgers who, if he returns, is not coming back for a long-term project. He's coming back to win immediately. And then your first move is to bring in a developmental left tackle who may not be ready, followed by a quarterback who's not expected to play. That disconnect matters. Players notice that. Coaches feel that. And it shapes how a season unfolds before it even begins. Now, on the flip side, imagine the alternative playing out. You bring in a guard who stabilizes your offensive line from day one. You add a receiver with legitimate speed who can stretch the field, create separation, and give your offense a different dimension. Suddenly, everything starts to look more balanced, more aligned. It's not about chasing perfection, it's about building cohesion, and that's where the Steelers have traditionally been at their best. When they draft with a clear vision, when every piece fits into a larger identity, that's when this organization thrives. Not when they're trying to outthink the room or gamble on long-term upside while the present is wide open in front of them. Another layer to this that can't be ignored is how the wide receiver position was handled in this projection. Waiting until pick 99 to address a clear need, and then only taking one receiver in an entire class that is known for its depth at the position. That's not just conservative, that's risky. Because now you're not just hoping that player develops, you're depending on it. You're putting immediate expectations on someone who may still be adjusting to the speed and complexity of the NFL game, especially coming from a simplified college system. And if that doesn't hit right away, the ripple effect is immediate. Your offense becomes predictable, your spacing suffers, your quarterback has fewer options, everything tightens up. That's how small decisions turn into big problems over the course of a season. So when you zoom out and look at the full picture, this isn't just about one mock draft. It's about philosophy. It's about understanding whether the Steelers are going to lean into what they are right now, a team built to compete, or drift into a middle ground where they're preparing for the future without fully committing to the present. And that middle ground, that's where teams get stuck. So now I'll leave it with you. Looking at everything we've discussed, from the early round decisions to the lack of urgency at key positions, do you feel like this type of draft approach puts the Steelers closer to contention?